This fair had its own court. In Champagne, merchants came for more than buying and selling. They came for chartered dates, toll exemptions, and legal protection on the road. Which raises a very modern-sounding question. Why were medieval traders crossing Europe for paperwork? This is the story of how medieval markets and fairs became something much more precise in Champagne, France. A rotating legal machine that connected Flanders and Italy and kept commerce moving. This is no history. When I first learned about medieval fairs, I imagined noise, mud, and bargaining. That image isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. Because a major fair was not simply a crowded place, it was a legal event. It began on paper before it filled with people. And once you see that, the whole picture sharpens. A medieval market usually served a local rhythm. Farmers brought grain, eggs, cheese, or small livestock, and neighbors arrived from a few miles away. A fair often served a much larger one. It was time-limited, chartered, and privileged. That meant a ruler, lord, bishop, abbey, or town granted rights that did not automatically apply on ordinary days. The difference sounds dry, but it changed the economics of travel. A merchant planning a journey did not just ask, "Where are the customers?" He also had to ask, "Where can I move goods with the least risk?" That second question mattered because medieval transport was brutally expensive by modern standards. Time, fodder, guards, bridge tolls, lodging, and spoilage all ate into profit before a single bale was sold. That is the first myth to drop away. Medieval fairs were not unregulated free spaces where anything went. They were structured spaces with defined dates, recognized privileges, and authorities who expected to be obeyed. Some privileges could include special toll treatment. Some could include temporary safe conduct. Some could include rules on weights, measures, debt, and where specific goods could be sold. The point was not fairness in the abstract. The point was predictable exchange. And in many places, the fair had its own court. That detail matters more than it first appears. If you're carrying dyed Flemish cloth, Italian bills of exchange and other credit devices, or a chest of coin, speed matters. So does trust. And trust, in the medieval economy, usually had to be written down and backed by power. That brings us to Champagne. In the 12th century, Champagne fairs rise to international prominence, connecting Flanders and Italy. This was not an accidental cluster of markets. It was a system under the protection of the Counts of Champagne. That protection mattered because Champagne sat in northeastern France, where major land routes could be coordinated rather than merely crossed. Troyes, Provins, Lagny, and Bar-sur-Aube were among the towns that hosted the rotating fairs. That rotation is one of the smartest parts of the whole design. Instead of one giant event that merchants might miss, the circuit created a reliable commercial calendar. A merchant from Flanders could move south with cloth. That cloth was valuable, bulky, and worth protecting. A merchant from Italy could move north with spices, luxury goods, metalware, or credit. Money changers and lenders could meet both streams in one place. And they needed to, because Europe did not share one tidy monetary system. A deal could involve cloth from Flanders, pepper routed through Italian merchants, and payment reckoned through exchange rather than a single bag of cash. In practice, that meant weighing silver, comparing local coinage, and translating value from one region's money into another region's account. Champagne sat between those worlds like a hinge. I find that image useful because it gets us away from the fantasy fair stereotype. These towns mattered because they organized exchange across distance. They also reduced a basic medieval problem. Information arrived slowly. If fairs happened on known dates, merchants could plan months ahead, line up partners, and move on expectation rather than guesswork. That regularity did something subtle but powerful. It allowed people who lived far apart to behave as if they shared a timetable. By the 13th century, Champagne fairs were major international commercial hubs. In the 12th and early 13th centuries, and remained important even as their relative dominance later declined. That phrase matters. It means merchants trusted this corridor enough to keep returning. And repeat traffic is the clearest proof that the system worked. So how did the machine actually work? First came authorization. A fair existed because someone with authority said it would exist on certain dates with certain rights. That sounds obvious, but it meant trade began with jurisdiction, not with stalls. Then came publicity. People had to know when and where to travel. A missed date could ruin a season. If a cloth convoy from Flanders reached Troyes after the buyers had shifted to the next phase of the circuit, the loss was not minor. It could mean storage costs, unsold inventory, and weeks of delay before capital turned back into usable money. Then came movement. This is where the legal side and the physical side meet. Roads were dangerous, expensive, and slow. A merchant could lose time to tolls, lose money to theft, or lose an entire deal because a dispute could not be settled before the next fair opened somewhere else. The fair reduced that uncertainty by concentrating trade into recognized windows of protection. Once merchants arrived, the town itself changed function. Spaces were assigned. That wasn't cosmetic. If you were looking for cloth, you needed cloth dealers together. If you were changing money or settling accounts, you needed the people who handled paper and coin close at hand. Weights and measures mattered. A disputed pound of pepper or a short measure of cloth could erase profit fast. Credit mattered. Cash did not need to move for every transaction if obligations could be recorded, transferred, or settled later. That matters because hauling a large fortune over bad roads invited disaster. Writing mattered. Names mattered too. So did memory, because these fairs repeated. A trader who paid late, used false weights, or broke a bargain could damage his name beyond one town. The next fair was not a reset button. Reputation could travel almost as usefully as coin. So the circuit did more than move goods. It moved information about reliability. That is why the schedule itself was infrastructure. This is the part that most changed my own mental picture. The real infrastructure was legal. Safe conduct meant that authorities promised protection for merchants traveling to and from the fair. That protection was especially valuable on approach roads, bridges, and choke points, where carts slowed and merchants were exposed. That promise was never magic. It worked only if local power could enforce it. That is why a charter without muscle was not much use. Toll exemptions worked the same way. An exemption was valuable because everybody knew tolls could eat away profit. If a convoy crossed multiple jurisdictions, every avoided fee mattered. A single fee might look small at one bridge or gate, but stack those charges across a long route, across several pack animals, across repeated annual journeys, and the burden becomes structural. And then there was the fair court. A market without enforcement is just hope. A fair court gave merchants a place to press claims, settle debts, and resolve arguments fast enough for commerce to continue. That speed was the point. A judgment delivered after merchants had already departed was far less useful than one delivered during the fair itself. It is easy to miss how radical that was for long-distance trade. Merchants were not asking for abstract justice. They were asking for usable justice before the caravan moved on. We do not have equally rich records for every fair in Europe, but England's St. Ives Fair is unusually well documented because fair court records survive from 1275 to 1324. Those records are precious because they show the fair as procedure, not just atmosphere. They show names, claims, debts, delays, and decisions. They also show repetition. Case after case turns the fair court from a colorful anecdote into an administrative machine. They remind us that trade needed clerks as much as caravans. Imagine a dispute over cloth quality, delayed payment, or a broken agreement. Imagine the timing pressure behind it. One merchant has to leave for the next stop in the Champagne circuit. Another may have borrowed money against a sale that has not happened yet. At ordinary distance, that problem could ruin a journey. At a fair with jurisdiction, it could be heard, recorded, and decided. The record itself mattered almost as much as the ruling. Once a debt or decision was written, memory became harder to manipulate. A written entry could outlast the crowd, the market noise, and the excuses. That speed is easy to overlook now, but long-distance commerce survives on timing. If the fair schedule rotated and the law moved quickly, the merchant could sell, settle, convert value, and head to the next town. That is the real achievement of the Champagne system in France. It made movement between fairs predictable enough that cloth, cash, and credit could keep circulating instead of freezing in dispute. 4 towns, 1 rotating trade machine. And that machine ran on dates, documents, and enforcement. So the payoff is simple. The Champagne Fair was not just a place where people met to trade, it was a temporary operating system for international commerce. These fairs remind us that trade rarely runs on open roads alone. It runs on rules people trust and on institutions fast enough to keep value moving. But if Champagne turned legal protection into a commercial superhighway, the next puzzle is how the traditionally attributed Dagobert I diploma associated with the Fair of Saint-Denis near Paris, though historians debate its authenticity, kept shaping status near Paris. I start with charters, toll clauses, and town ordinances because the fine print is where medieval markets stop being a blur and become a system. Which part of the Champagne fairs changes your mental picture most? The rotating fair towns, the toll exemptions, or the fair court? Until the next charter opens, keep your eye on the toll gate.